as well. And, you know, my favourite one, pirating. Yeah, here, I hope you enjoy the top.
Yeah,
Thank you, Ray.
Go back. Thank you so much for a lovely introduction and for welcoming me to Healesville Library. Please feel free to hang on to a book and have a leaf around. If you want to get up and walk around, I've got some sketchbooks that you can have a flick through as well if you like. So today we're talking about sketchbooking your comic and getting from this pile of sketchbooks to a lovely finished piece of work here. And I want to kick off by talking a bit about the Australian publishing industry, which is not like an axe to grind, but I just want to observe something about Australian publishing and graphic novels, which is, once I started looking into making a comic, I did my research and realised there's only about 2 or 3 graphic novels published every year by major Australian publishers, which is not to say that there's none published in Australia. There's heaps of comics made, obviously, and this is a comics area which Sabina has assured me is a big zine following here in Healesville. And I don't think that's such a dire picture. I don't think it will always be that way, but I think that means that the sky is the limit for all of us who love comic books, and we can kind of do whatever we feel like. And this is where I came in, thinking I had a very set image of what the publishing industry was expecting from me. And then now I said I'm going to do it whichever way I please, which for me is, we just talked to Jim before about being visual people, and I'm a visual person, so I take a very drawing first approach, as opposed to, you know, writing the script and that sort of thing. So a lot of people think that producing your first comic is, you're dreaming of this kind of moment here, which is publication day and you've got your baby in your arms. And that's just one day of my life, but unfortunately making comics for me anyway was a bit more like on the right, which is, who am I, what am I doing, I don't know, what is this medium, who's going to read it, and so on and so forth. So today I want to talk a bit about how I developed just a good sketchbook practice, and from that how my comic kind of emerged. And I just want to say that drawing every day, which is something a lot of art teachers come out with, you know, primary, secondary, tertiary, and I think it's not a fantastic advice for all of us, particularly not for me, but I want to talk about creating a good habit rather than flagellating yourself with the idea of drawing every single day. To talk about this lovely quote from Octavia Butler, who's a black science fiction author from the States, and she's, apart from being a wonderful author, she always has really good kind of encouraging quotes, which is, forget inspiration, habit is more dependable. Habit will sustain you whether you're inspired or not. Habit will help you finish and polish your stories. Inspiration won't. Habit is persistence in practice. And that, I think, is very applicable to your sketchbook practice for sure, in that a lot of people think artists just wake up in the morning and just dash out a beautiful artwork because they're so inspired and amazing and talented. But creating any sort of creative practice is a bit more about having a good solid habits. So over here on the right, I just wanted to just showcase a few of some of the tools that I use. It's all, my theory is keep it very cheap and accessible and always on hand. So it's just really El Cheapo markers from Officeworks, bamboo skewers, chicken skewers from the kitchen that I throw ink around. I don't normally buy Winsor & Newton, but I splashed out because I thought I'm making a comic. Any old black ink will do. Some paintbrushes, dip pens. You don't need, I've got hundreds of them, you don't need that. You need one pen holder and one nib, and that will kind of cover it. Soft pencils, light blue pencil just to do the underdrawing, you know, maybe some toothbrushy type nail brushy things to scatter a bit of ink out, but it's all very accessible. And I make my life a bit easy by having a small sketchbook from a small handbag, medium-sized one from my medium-sized handbag, and then a bunch of bigger A3s at home and bigger things for finished art. So it's always there and on hand. So when I first started, so just a bit of background, what I'm showing today is from about 2006, 16 onwards, so it's only about 8 years worth of sketchbooks, which is when I really started to take drawing a bit more seriously. And hopefully you can pluck a few ideas out of this for your own kind of creative practice. And this is the kind of stuff you get when you're told to bring your sketchbook with you everywhere and draw every day. And you get really, stressed about what am I going to do today, oh my God, and just, it's a real scattergun approach. You just kind of draw in anything. And so when you're developing your sketchbook, you might want to think about, is it my private journal that I never show to anybody and I write things in? Is it my therapist that I unburden myself to? Is it more like an art manifesto? It doesn't have to be any of those things, but I think if you want to keep a good sketchbook, you might want to think about what it represents to you in your life. So this is all fine, like this sort of stuff is all fine in the sketchbook, but there's no real intention about it. It's just scraping all the crud off the top of my brain and putting it onto the page and then turning the page and getting on with it. So there's a bit of cartooning, a bit of botanical illustration, a bit of whatever. And on we go. I mean, it's just kind of anything, anywhere, anytime I feel like drawing something, I draw. And like I said, that's all well and good. It's walking around back laneways of Carlton, it's trying to figure out how one of those electrical poles kind of works, and like getting up one day and going, what would it be like to have an octopus as a hat? I need to draw that. But it's fine and dandy, but it's not got much intention, and I find that not much creative ideas come from that. It's a bit too broad. So then the next thing you want to do is start thinking about what you actually want to be able to draw. As comic book artists, definitely the human figure. The easiest thing to knock off in the day is draw your hands. I'm bad at drawing hands, we're all bad at drawing hands. The best time to start drawing is yesterday. So draw what's in front of you, draw your foot and your hand, and this is something they'll get you to do in school. And then when you get tired of drawing your body parts, think a bit further. My cat's everywhere in my life. He sits on me constantly, he's always in my face. So pets and family are great, because that's an easy way to fill up your sketchbook pretty quickly. They're always on the move. My cat doesn't care about anyone but himself. He's very funny. You do a bit of cartooning, a bit of whatever. And again, family, you might want to think about the people who are around you, maybe your kids or your parents. This is my husband, who's always lounging around. He's a great napper and a great reader, so he's a perfect life model for me. I've got hundreds and hundreds of pictures of him. So that's super duper easy way to fill up your sketchbook. So, and a great warm up as well. So once you've kind of exhausted the possibilities of your husband and your cat and your toes, really recommend just getting out and about. This is one of my favourite things to do in the entire world, is find a crowded spot, maybe Fed Square or something, and take it to the streets. Public transport, just different attitudes of people, often the back of their heads. Everyone's buried in their phones these days. It's a perfect way to spy on people and get a good drawing in. And it just teaches you so much about human nature as well. Different body types, different character, different way that people hold their body or they walk or whatever. Absolutely love doing this. And there's like this lady up here who walked into a shop I was in this big kind of parachute type all-in-one suit, and I imagine what if it filled up with air and she took off into the sunset, This big tough guy with tats all over his hands on the number 96 tram or whatever, with his arm around his pooch, there's so much going around you all the time. It's very tempting to go, oh, I've got nothing to draw, but there's so many things to draw. If you get out and about and, again, not trying to do too much, like this would be a climate change rally over here, and I'm not trying to be the best artist in the whole planet or depict people as they are exactly, but I just want a sense of what a rally might be like, Over here, it's in the queue at the animal hospital. Beaches are a fantastic way to get your sketchbook filled up. People are so themselves on the beach, I find. They're lolling around, they're not wearing very much, they're reading, they're splashing about. It's like this open air cinema for you to sit back and enjoy. So I think that's another one of my really favourite places to go with my sketchbook. Now, like once a few years in, I'd started getting a pretty good sketchbook kind of habit, and learnt the really important distinction between critiquing and judgment, which I think a lot of art teachers do talk about, which is judgment is saying, I hate this drawing, I love this drawing, I hate this, I had a terrible day of drawing, I'm a horrible artist. So that's not helpful to you, as an artist or as a human being, really. So when we talk about critiquing, the sketchbook is a perfect way to critique what you're up to. And say, for example, this woman yawning in the middle, I might, if I wanted to critique that and help myself grow as an artist, I might go, well, I've got her attitude really well of the yawn, so I'm pretty pleased with that, but maybe the proportions are slightly too long, and I might want to spend a little bit more time ensuring that the top of her head to the bottom of her feet are in proportion. And that's just without, beating myself up about it. And then finally, when you're outside, I find botanical drawing really, really freeing as an artist. And this is another thing I like to do, is go down to the Mary Creek and sit in a patch of mud in my little chair or on a rock or something. The shapes are all so organic, and you find you can concentrate on things more like negative space and repeating patterns and all that sort of lovely stuff that you get out in nature. This would be in Ireland, I think this was here, so as I'm a pen and ink artist, I'm always looking for different ways to convey texture, to convey different types of vegetation, for example. And you can muck around and have a lot of fun. So I do regularly take myself out to Royal Park near where I live and just sit under a tree and just have a little play. This is a really important point to make, because I think this is another time that art teachers might take people down the garden path, is you have to draw X, Y, Z, you have to draw fruit, you got to know how to do a portrait, you got to do this, you got to do that, and that's very much the art education I received as a child. Whereas these days, I think we can be much more open about that and draw whatever interests you. And for me, obviously that's fencing. I used to run a fencing club. It's just perpetually fascinating to me, just the different types of shapes and personality. You can be fencing and someone says, who are those guys fencing? And you know who they are because their attitude is so strong, their personality comes out on the piece. There's so much movement and vibrancy. So for me, fencing is a big interest of mine. But, a lot of young artists I find are shamed a bit for doing fan art or pictures of their favourite singer or people they like on TikTok or whoever. I think it's so important to draw what interests you, what you love, music, cinema, your favourite sport, like whatever. It's really important to draw what interests you. There you go. Here's another particular weird interest of mine, which is strange suits and helmets. I keep a big file of these, just love them. I have no idea why. Just emerged out of the sketchbook practice. Every time there's some sort of environmental catastrophe, I'm there screenshotting what kind of suits they're wearing. This would be the murder hornets in the States. They have these really cool, like, sci-fi suits on. I'm like, oh yes, get them into the folder. Old firefighters outfits. I love old NASA suits, anything. So there's no reason behind this. It's just a personal love of mine. I just love the variation. I love masks. What can I say? So yeah, really important to just follow up on all those strange passions you might have. This is another big interest of mine. I've been very fortunate to do a lot of travel in my life. And this is actually going much further back than 8 years. It was the first place I travelled when I was younger, to West Africa. So like 25 years ago or something like that. And photography wasn't great. I had a really dodgy camera. it was culturally kind of insensitive to stick your camera in people's faces anyway, like it is, I guess, still in a lot of places. But I first learnt to keep a really good travel journal when I was travelling West Africa, which is all the countries kind of south of Morocco and in the Sahara. And at the time, I was just fresh out of the... Oh, Jim.
About photography, I understand that, but when you draw people, is it the same in Africa? Will they be more interested?
In me drawing?
Well, no, do people allow you, they don't like being photographed because you take their soul, all that sort of stuff, but drawing them, they don't mind?
They don't mind, but it would create such a kerfuffle every time I brought out my sketchbook. I've got a pretty funny story. Yeah. Because I was so obviously a foreign woman travelling on her own. Yeah. Every time I left the hotel room, I'd get like a gang of people would come with me to do what, like literally everything.
Organic fans.
Very much so, and I'd have the sketchbook and people would have their heads in between my head and the sketchbook to check it out. And they loved it, like they loved being drawn and stuff.
Yeah, oh, that's good.
I would just create a bit of a to-do every time I busted it out. But what I did at that time was, I was fresh out of the animation industry at that stage and very switched on visually, so I'd take a mental snapshot and I'd go back to my hotel room and remember everything. And it's just a perfect way of not just capturing exactly what's there, but all the interesting, fascinating cultural things that I learnt there, different gestures of people getting trapped between two rivers in the mountains, beautiful West African tea, going to a witch doctor's house in Mali and that sort of thing. So I really sort of expanded my sketchbooking skills there. And this fast forward again more 25 years to Japan, which was this year. And you can see then where all the different elements of my practice of coming in to really record what I was up to in Japan. We had a long trip, we were about an hour out of the city, so we'd spent a lot of time on the trains, and everyone was kind of zoned out. They were all on their phone, they were napping. It's a very quiet, depending on the time of day, it's a quiet and peaceful environment. So perfect for drawing. Over here, we went to this lovely town called Kanazawa, just on the end, and it's a historical town that's similar to Kyoto. And all the young people they go to the costume shop and dress up in these incredible, yukata and kimonos and just swan around eating ice creams and stuff, which is just a beautiful place to visit. And then up the top, we went to these historic botanic gardens, and we said there must be thousands of people looking after this place. And we talked to one of the gardeners who was all 80 plus, and he said, no, there's only 25 of us working like crazy and physically scraping up all the blossoms by hand. Here's another great place to have a sketchbook, which was this ethnographic museum. They had this wonderful exhibition of masks, but they were so old you couldn't take photos. So there's always all these bewildered school kids hanging out. What are we going to do here? And I said, fantastic, I'll be drawing those, thank you very much. Things like little interesting cultural things you pick up along the way when you travel. I went to this Hasegawa Machiko art museum with a friend, and it's just a traditional, it's a comic book artist who's been known in Japan since the 30s, and I've never heard of her, but she's huge in Japan over many, many generations of families. And it's just family situations in daily Japanese life, but you've got all these generations of people who just love her. And the museum's set up to different elements, to make it really interactive with children, but which means, of course, it's full of middle-aged ladies like my friend going, just remember this, And there was this projection on the ground of these circles, and my mate said, do you know this one, Ken Ken Pa? And she starts hopping around. I'm like, what are you up to? And I was like, hopscotch. She's like, hopscotch? And I'm like, Ken Ken Pa? What? It's the same thing. And I said, in Australia, we draw squares, and it looks like this. She's like, really? What do you do? We've got circles, and we've got the bit of chalk. It was all the same thing. So it means so much more to me than just taking pictures with the phone, I get so much more out of it, and it's something that gives me personal pleasure just to look back through them, much more than my dodgy old photos. And then on we go. It's more about the feelings it evokes. Like, none of these are going for gold, trying to be the best drawings ever. but I still love looking back at them, like this old pub in Dublin where you know, these local musicians have just collected. It's like something in a cheesy old movie where they got their traditional instruments out and so everyone started singing. And just having a nice 20 minutes to sit down and soak up the old pub kind of atmosphere that they've got that's so lovely over there. It's just a great way to interact with your environment, you know, and so on and so forth throughout Morocco. So a few years in, after taking my sketchbooks a bit more seriously, started to really think about, you know, being a bit more organised about it, and taking good photo and film references is a great way to go in keeping some sort of intelligent filing system. It could be on Pinterest, you can have a personal account, you don't have to share it with anyone, something good that's on your phone that's slightly organised, your computer, whatever. I'm always looking at the news. I love The Guardian because they've got really good photographers there, but it could be any kind of movie. TikTok's great, all those daggy videos. This woman up here, she had some revolting like beige workout outfit on and these plastic shoes, and she was walking around like she's the hottest woman on the planet. I'm like, I have to keep this lady, I love her. I have to draw her. Same with, you know, anything that's too posed I'm not really into, but something that's a bit more natural and lively I really love. So being a good artist, I think, is not just about going to exhibitions and studying, you know, that sort of thing. It's about being open to, I don't know, so many new and different visual things. It might be about going to a band or an event, you know, and just perhaps saying yes to things that you might normally say no to, because you can bring your sketchbook along and just, you know, study people from a different angle. I was going to bang on about zines, but I'm reliably informed this is a zine haven. This is just a wonderful place that just reopened in the city. There we go. Zines are present. And I found as a little gateway into comics, this was great actually. I just collected a bunch of sketchbooks, drawings, and made a little publication. I thought, it's easy, I'll slap it together, and it was much harder than I thought it was. Just the whole concept of creating this beautiful printed thing, getting everything looking cohesive and getting people to the last page, printing it, you know, marketing it, who's going to buy something like that. Sticky Institute's great. They say, if you have a zine, we will stock it. So, perfect. It's just an awesome way to start thinking about comics. So, now I was pretty confident in my sketchbook practice, and this is when I really started to shape my ideas with, again, without anything particular in mind. And again, going to draw what interests you. I love snorkeling and the deep sea. Unfortunately, you can't draw down there. You have to just, again, take your mental snapshot. Again, when some deep sea scientists pull some disgusting jelly things out of the abyssal pelagic, I'm there, I'm collecting the pictures. I love all that stuff. I don't know what any of it is, but I love drawing it. So I'm starting to collect a few more images and so on of, you know, and be, again, much more intentional about it. Going back to travel, this is from a trip to Patagonia I took maybe 5 years ago, I guess. The whole tour was in Spanish, so I can't tell you what created these beautiful rock formations, but I just looked, it looks like someone's created them with ink. It's called the Marble Caves, and so I started riffing on that and getting some bigger, you know, larger form artworks and getting, you know, scattering some inks about, making things much bigger and getting out the toned papers and the soft pencils in black and white and so on. So just getting out of the sketchbook a little bit more. And then this chap sort of appeared somewhere. I thought it needs some sort of perspective and balance, something very big with something very small. So I started mucking around with this guy. Again, still loving to read about, you know, the kelp forests of Tasmania that are dying out. What if there was someone living down there that could see all of this environmental destruction? My background is, well, my first career anyway was in 2D animation, so it's kind of a cartoony approach. So I'll always draw a turnaround of a character. And so again, I'm still drawing regularly and thinking about this guy. I've got this concept of this man falling down. You know, this guy just sort of, came from nowhere. Who in Australia, who's our most famous snorkeler and scuba diver, Howard Holt. I'm presuming everyone here knows who he is. I was going to put it into context for...
when he died, and those photographs of him standing there in his scuba thing, it was the exact same time that the James Bond film Thunderball came out. Which is all about most of the film is set underwater, and they're all fighting underwater and
I
stuff.
did not know that was coming.
I thought Harold...
Crazy.
Isn't Harold in China? I thought the Chinese got him with a submarine.
Oh, well, people used to walk into fish and chip shops and say, I'll have minimum chips and a piece of Holt, please. You know?
That's what I was going to talk about, like when you leave a party suddenly you do a Harold Holt. Yeah. So I started reading about this guy, which everyone here knows about. I was really fascinated by him because for me he was just like a punchline. It's just something in the consciousness, I think, but without actually really knowing who he was or what he did when he was a leader or anything. And one of his quotes was, I think that swimming underwater is the closest you could get to being in deep space. So that sort of sparked off a few kind of ideas. And so I took myself off to Point Nepean, which is where he disappeared, and it's had a lovely 3 days there. Just kind of soaking it up and hiking and finding out about the history. Went down to Cheviot Beach where he disappeared, and you can't actually get on to the beach. But you can see all the tides going in all directions, and even on a calm day it looks like the most dangerous beach on earth. So like, I don't know what he was thinking. I was still experimenting with my art, so getting a bit bigger. Went down to the State Library to find out, read as many Holt books as I can with the Chinese submarine theory. A little bit of writing, just mucking around with kind of the comics medium without thinking that I was going to make a comic. I saw this guy down there. So there's multiple layers of history down at Point Nepean, starting with the Bunurong people who were there about 40,000 years ago, and there would have been generations of them who would have seen Port Phillip Bay fill up over the years, which is one of our main geographical areas of interest in Melbourne. And then after then you had the invasion with the sealers and the colonists, and then they've got a quarantine station down there before they had vaccines. They had refugees from Kosovo around the turn of the century. They had 2 different world wars. They've got all these cool forts and so on. They had all sorts of unexploded bombs down there, so you can't just wander around in the bush down there. You've got to stick to the path, because the army just in the 60s used to just use it as a practice, and they've just lobbed all these things into the bush, and it hasn't been cleared completely. So really fascinating. So it was sort of starting to take a hold by this stage. I just love this guy in particular, but I love the whole area. And it's kind of represented a real turning point for me, which is when I thought, I think I've got a comic here. And it was kind of that inciting moment where you have to keep going forward. It's not something you can just shelve for a few months or whatever and go, I'm bored with that now. It was something that I felt that I had to make. And so I started kind of shopping the idea around, a handful of publishers and like mentorships and grants and so on. And I spent probably a bit too much time doing that, to be honest, and got absolutely nowhere. And got absolutely nothing out of it either. I didn't get any feedback or anything with my idea, because book publishers want a script, they want a book proposal for a page, they want a character model sheet, they want maybe 4 to 6 pages of your comic that are finished and lettered and coloured and so on. And I certainly wasn't there. I said, I've got this cool idea, I've got a précis, I've got, a ton of materials now, but I can't convince anyone. And I sort of beat my head against the wall a little bit about it. And then I had this realisation that I can do this any way that I please. And why on earth am I asking someone for permission to make my story? So not only is no one absolutely panting and, you know, desperate to get this Harold Holt comic out into the world. But the only person that can make it is me. And it was actually really, really freeing kind of moment when I said, I'm going to do this all myself. I'm going to create it. It's going to be beautiful. I'll get it printed and published, and I will distribute it. And it's going to be the best piece of artwork that I've done. So this is how this comic sort of started to come together. This is my old studio in the city. So I'm very visual, so I like to have all my notes and drawings and so on up around me to keep going. And at this point I sat down and I had a plot outline, and I just banged it all out in Word, and I showed it to a friend, very excited, and he was a playwright, and he said, all right, let's talk about the basics of storytelling. He gave me a few really good ideas. I was like, all right, I need to keep going on this. It's not ready to start drawing. I chopped up my Word document. I put it down over there in one big long thing in my studio. So, you know, a few flashbacks here and there, but hopefully enough momentum to keep it going. I looked at that and I said, that's at least 3 comics, or let's say 120 pages, which is the average size of a graphic novel. Knowing myself, I know I'm not going to spend the next 10 years slogging away. I said, I'll just do a third of that and create 1 comic to start with, and see if I can finish it, just see if I can do it. I wasn't quite ready for the script or the storyboard yet, so I did this weird interim thing, which is not quite thumbnails, and it's not quite a storyboard, and it's not anything really, but it helped me enormously. Because again, going back to that, it's a very visual piece. I want the pictures to tell the story more than the script. Very hard thing to get across to publishers. So I created this thing, and you can see, like here, I don't even know what they're saying to each other, but it was like blah, 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 and then this character says something about yada, yada, yada. And then I had it down. I'm like, this is kind of the way where I want to be. Then I was ready for the script, which was more a standard Word document. There's a million examples online. Model sheets, a bit of a character turnaround. And then I did the storyboard and put it up. I wanted to have a bit of a rough, inky kind of vibe. I put my influences down there, which are largely comic book people, but just want to caution that influences can come from anywhere. If you only look at other comic book artists, you just draw something that looks like other comic book artists. So my influences come from the documentaries, movies, sculpture, whatever. But specifically with relating to black ink artists, these are some of my faves. Alberto Breccia's, it's Uruguay? No, it's Paraguayan. Where is he from? He's from Argentina. Comic book artist of the 60s. It does this lovely style here with collage and ripping things up, chucking things around, drawing with razor blades and so on. Absolutely love him. So I thought I'd have a bit of a crack at doing that myself to make it quite a textural piece. This was during one of the first lockdowns, so I was going to go out into the field and gather rocks and twigs or whatever, but I had to do it all inside, so I had to go to my kitchen and gather whatever that I could find around the house to create these textures. And then after that, it was pretty straightforward actually, because I'd done so much thinking about it and so much writing and so much dreaming about this wonderful idea that it was pretty much pencils, inks, compositing. That's just an example of what it might look like. The big double page spreads I did on big things that were about that big. You can see some of the background textures, because by this stage I'm keeping pretty good visual references, textual references. So that's like the lift doors down at the really old building where my studio used to be. And this is some moss from my mother-in-law's garden, some lichen, you know.
Looks like Little Nemo.
Little Nemo. Oh yeah, the old Windsor
The
McCoy.
Slumberland, yeah.
Thank you, I like to hear that. Because he's a favourite. With the cover, you know, when you're an indie comics maker, you've got to be your own art director, so you do have to actually have to try a few different versions of what you want to do. The cover's really important. It sells it, you know, this big online or big on a poster or in a bookshop, you know. I'm not going to make any money out of this, but I really want people to pick it up and read it, to be honest. And I had this idea straight up, but I still felt that I had to push it and see. I wanted this kind of double page, you know, like a full piece of artwork that was a continuous artwork like that wraps around the back cover. And then that's just draw it again, draw it again, draw it again, so it's just right. So that's another rough that goes into inking, because I'm, you know, I could do this all on computer, but I'm a bit more literal, so I like to, you know, cut up a photo that I took and then use that as a reference. And then that's the final piece of artwork. I hired a colourist and a letterer who did an amazing job. Like, in my whole life I would never do a beautiful colour job like that, so I'm really glad that I engaged someone to work on something I didn't know much about.
Did they use computer or?
They did, yeah, and not on Photoshop. He said it was something secret. Didn't tell me. So,
Stuff paint.
yeah, clicks, but he said no, not that either. So then it was the story of, you know, publishing it and launching it, and crowdfunding is a whole other talk, which we won't talk about. So then this went out into the universe. And I thought, I'm going to shelve this, you know, because life took over, and it was released in 2020, end of 2022. And then this thing popped up, which was lovely Sabina, who wrote me an email and said, have you heard of this residency? I'm like, no. Down in Mornington Peninsula, which was all about the ecology and history and everything about Point Nepean. And I thought I'd have to be a bit silly if I didn't apply for that, and I'd have to be silly if I didn't get it either. So I said, this is the very last grant that I will enter, and amazingly got this residency, which was 2.5 weeks, down, staying pretty much inside the national park. Got to wander around and work on the second part of the comic, which was glorious, and pretty much only took me like a week and a half to really bed down what I wanted to say. So there was kind of an extra week where I was just rattling around there, and it was all the same sketchbook habits that I've now kind of really bedded down into place. It's a few, you know, little comic book panels and mucking around with textures and picking things up off the beach and dipping them into ink, making a few notes, going down to the historical museum and talking to them, you know, everything that's quite familiar to me. So it's actually this second time around, after spending 5 years staggering around not knowing what I'm doing, this was a week and a half. I was really super focused. I got down there and I said, you haven't done anything in 4 hours, let's go. So I went into the bush and walked for 3 or 4 hours every day with my sketches and thinking and dreaming, and it was
And how is the storyline compared to what you put up first in the second
so
half?
completely different.
Okay, good.
I looked at it, I brought it down, I said, this is trash. Let's just put that to one side.
I'm so glad about that, because life happens, you know.
It does.
Yeah,
I'm like, yeah, and it would be focused on this female character that Holt meets, the woman with a tube for a head, and that's all her backstory. So, quite a different focus. And it was great. I could just, rather than the initial 3 days, I was able to sit around for hours outside, you know, drawing these weird forts that they've got all over the place. Quarantine station after dark. Don't recommend walking around in the national park after dark. Really scary. Really haunted. Got out, you know, the charcoals and ink wash and that sort of stuff. Just could sit on the beach for hours and look at a piece of wood. It was wonderful. Yeah, a bit more character development. Walked, you know, my dad came down and we walked through all the tunnels and so on. Super duper fun. And I think that's about it. So I just wanted to share some comics resources, which you'll find mostly on Instagram, and I suspect that everyone here would know all about them anyway. Mention Sticky Institute. This is just, I think it's just a good spread of what's happening in Australian comics, and who's who and who's doing what, who's being published and who's indie and whatever. Comic Art Workshop is a graphic artist residency that they do every 2 years, but they, on their socials, they talk a lot about who's doing stuff. Cockatoo Comics is a retailer up in Sydney, but she does really nice reviews on her site, on her Instagram. yeah, and I just think she's very finger on the pulse of what's happening in Australia and internationally, and in indie comics in particular. I'd have a look, you know, small publishers and zine festivals. You know, I'd love to go to the Perth Comics Arts Festival. It's a little bit of a schlep. There's loads around. There's a new one coming up in Sydney. There's heaps of, you know, places like here, for example, you know, being promoted. And then finally the ALIA, which is the librarians who do just a fantastic podcast and blog as well. So they, you know, bring out a lot of stuff every year. That's just a little bit of a superficial list. There's so many resources out there, but I just wanted to highlight that. And then that's all. So I just wanted to open up just for questions. But before I did that, I just wanted to finally impress upon everybody, please don't ask for permission to make your own artwork. You've got to do it in your way that your brain works best, whether you're visual or written or a little bit of both. Definitely start small, even if it's 2 panels on 1 page, and keep drawing. And that's all from me, and yeah, check me out online and drop me a line.
You just stand in front of the board.